Hello, hello, all you beautiful people. Today we'll be continuing learning about the InstantID model. You may recall from the last video in the series that we learned how to use the basics of InstantID and how to improve our results by adding in more images of the face we're wanting to use. But that only let us control the face of our image generation. We didn't have any control over the head position or body pose. So today, let's go ahead and build upon our skills and learn how to do just that. We'll start as we normally do in Compute Grid. We'll go over to the All Instances page, select the machine that we want to use, and then click Start Instance. And while we wait, I have a teensy little favor to ask all of you lovely, beautiful people. Would you mind just checking the little subscribe button for me and seeing if you're subscribed? I would greatly appreciate it, and it would allow you all to stay up to date on all of our upcoming videos. So it's a win-win. Anyway, now that our instance is loaded up, we'll go ahead and navigate to ComfyUI by going to the SDXL tab and then clicking Launch SDXL. With this button click, I am installing, running, and setting up Stable Diffusion and ComfyUI. So all I have to do is just wait and then click a link. You should now be looking at the default workflow for ComfyUI. Let's go ahead and begin with all of our installs first. And there is a lot. We'll go ahead and begin with InstantID and installing the three parts that build it up. So that's going to be our Insight face, the InstantID ControlNet, and then the InstantID IP adapter. Now that all three of our models are installed for InstantID, we have to install two more that we'll be using today. So let's go ahead and search for depth, as that's going to be our first one. And we're going to go ahead and install this depth Zoe over here. And then we'll search for our next one, which is going to be the OpenPose model, so we'll just search for pose. And it's going to be this one right here, the SDXL ControlNet specifically. And once all 5 models are installed, we'll need to go back into our manager one more time, but this time to install custom nodes. And then we'll go ahead and we'll search for InstantID one more time. And we're going to install the ComfyUI InstantID native support nodes. After that, we have one more node to install, so we'll go ahead and we'll search for ControlNet and install the ComfyUI ControlNet auxiliary preprocessors. This we're going to use for the last 2 models we installed earlier. Alright, now that all of that is done, we can finally go ahead and restart ComfyUI. And then we just gotta refresh our browser page. And now we may begin. So let's go ahead and start with our default workflow and change this into our InstantID workflow. We're gonna go ahead and cut it in half using Control-Click and then Shift-Drag. Using the same method, I am also going to kind of just lower that down. Not important, but just for me. And then we're going to go ahead and adjust our empty latent image nodes and change that over from 512 to the SDXL standard 1024. And now we can go ahead and grab our first node, the Apply InstantID node, and then we'll just connect it into place like so. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and start with the rest of our nodes. So that's going to be our InstantID model loader, our Insight ID face analysis node, and then we're going to grab a ControlNet loader, and we just need to make sure that we are loading in the InstantID diffusion model. Again, this is going to be all 3 of our necessary parts for InstantID. And then we can grab our load image node and select our image that we want to use. I'm going to go ahead and use this image of Hailee Steinfeld. And as a reminder, just to make sure that our image does still reside in a 640 by 640 box. And now I'll be using Hailee Steinfeld today because she kind of reminds me of a D&D ranger. And now I know that may or may not be heavily influenced by seeing her in Hawkeye, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and start with our prompt. And don't worry if you are not into D&D, you do not need to know anything about it for this tutorial today. Just know that a ranger is kind of like a, I guess like an archer or a huntswoman, huntsmen, whichever you prefer. And they're going to be just warriors, fighters, they're known to be into archery, that sort of thing. And then because I don't want this image to turn out too realistic, we're going to fill it in with words like illustration, painting, art, and I do want it to be magical and naturey. And we're going to add in just bow and arrow as our last keyword. And now for our negative, we're going to go ahead and put in what I don't want to see. I don't want it to be overly realistic. It can't be glitchy, noisy, deformed, the whole shebang. Alright, and then before we go ahead and cue prompt, let's go ahead and change some of these values over. I'm going to change my steps from 20 to 30, and then because we have a lot going on conditioning, of course we're going to need to lower our CFG down, so I'm going to do 2.5 to start. I'm also going to change my sampler from Euler to DPM to Ancestral. And now let's go ahead and cue prompt and see what this default workflow gives us. Okay, not too bad. The model did a good job of applying our prompt to the face, but I really don't have any control on what she's doing. So let's go ahead and change that. To do that, we're going to go ahead and grab another load image node, and we're going to use this node to load in our pose. Let's go ahead and start with this one just to begin. We'll then go ahead and connect this image over to this image KPS node. And KPS just stands for image key points. What are key points? Well, we can go ahead and use a face key points preprocessor, and then connect that in, and then a preview image like so. And let's connect our face analysis. And if we click cue prompt, we should be able to see exactly what the key points exactly are over in our preview image. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look. So our image isn't bad, but it's not exactly doing the pose we want it to do. And if we take a peek at our key points, we can see why. Because all it does is look at the face key points. So the eyes, the nose, and the jawline in particular. So although that is in position, and although it does influence their end result, it doesn't actually affect everything else. So thankfully for that, we have our other two ControlNet models from earlier. So let's go ahead and first, let's scooch over our workflow one more time, like that, and let's move this over. And we can go ahead now and grab a ControlNet loader, and to start with, I'm going to choose to use the depth model instead. Zoe depth model instead. And now that we have our ControlNet model, let's go ahead and grab a ControlNet Apply Advanced. We can then go ahead and just connect that in to everything in between our K-Sampler and InstantID node. Just like so. And then before we continue on, let's go ahead and lower the strength of this ControlNet. we don't want it to be too high and risk it affecting our InstantID. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and connect our image, but since we're using the Zoe depth, we're going to use one more node, and that's going to be the Zoe depth anything node. So now let's go ahead and leave this still connected to key points, but now chain that together like so. And I'm going to grab another preview image so we can see everything that's going on with our control net. And now let's change our values here from indoor to outdoor, and then from 512 to 1024. Let's go ahead now and Q prompt and see what we get. Alright, awesome. So we can go ahead and see that our depth map did a fantastic job of picking up the overall pose and applying it to our image. Let's go ahead now though and let's try it with OpenPose instead. So let's go ahead and change our control net model, and then we just need to remove this Zoe depth anything node and replace it with OpenPose pose processor. And do the same thing we did earlier, connecting it to the same places, and then changing our resolution from this 512 to 1024. Now let's go ahead and Q prompt. Alright, so not too bad at all. It did a fantastic job of picking up the face points and this first hand, but as we can see, as in our base image, the hand in the foreground is relatively blurry, and so our key points did not pick up on that. And so it did have a slight effect on our overall image. So let's go ahead and try it with one other pose. Let's do this one instead, where everything is easily visible and everything is equally in the foreground. Let's go ahead now and Q prompt one last time. Much better. That is a remarkable difference right there. And if we look at our key points, we can see why. The image was able to pick up on all the details and the hands, and we still got our face points, everything locked in beautifully. OpenPose is great when it comes to the more detailed poses and when everything is all in frame and even. But if the pose is varying in degrees between the foreground and the background, using a depth map like we did earlier is going to be a much better choice. So folks, there you have it. You now know how to set character poses using InstantID. With these techniques, you can now improve your image generation and take it to the next level and create more dynamic and engaging characters. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest tutorials and tips. And I always love hearing from you, so drop a comment below if you have any questions, suggestions, or just want to say hi. Thank you as always for tuning in. Until next time, keep creating and stay awesome.